Currencies come and go. Some become incredibly powerful only to fade into history. But one currency rose to dominate the entire globe, and its story is way more surprising than you'd ever guess.
It all really starts with a simple question. What in the world could a silver mine in 16th century Bohemia possibly have to do with the cash you're using every single day? Well, the answer is literally everything. And get this, the story of the dollar doesn't even begin in America. To understand the dollar, we have to go back more than 500 years. Our story starts not with a country, but with the birth of a single word. So, picture this. It's 1519, and a rich silver mine is found in a town called Joachimsthal. The shiny new coins they mint there are called Joachimsthalers. I know, it's a bit of a mouthful, right? So, people naturally shortened it to just Thaler. And that name caught on like wildfire. Pretty soon, people all over Europe were calling any big silver coin a thaler. So when folks started crossing the Atlantic to the New World, they brought that word with them. And over time, with a new accent, thaler slowly morphed into the word we all know today, dollar. Okay, let's jump forward a couple of hundred years. That simple name is about to become a powerful symbol of rebellion. You've got to understand, the American colonies were in a real bind. The British Empire, wanting to keep all the wealth for itself, made it illegal to export its own gold and silver coins. This basically starved the colonial economies. So what did they do? They had to adapt to survive. The solution was the Spanish silver peso. It was everywhere. This foreign coin literally became the lifeblood of trade in the colonies. And you can probably guess what the colonists called it: the dollar. So what about that famous dollar sign, the dollar sign? You might think it comes from a U and an S for United States, but nope, it actually comes straight from the Spanish peso. Back then, the shorthand for pesos was PS. Scribes, trying to be efficient, just started writing the S right on top of the P. After a while, they got lazy and dropped the curvy part of the P, leaving behind the symbol we know today. It's kind of wild. The dollar sign was born long before the United States was even a country. And even way back in 1729, brilliant minds like Benjamin Franklin saw the problem. He argued that if they kept relying on foreign coins, all the profits would just sail back to Europe. He pushed hard for the colonies to print their own paper money to boost their own economies. But Britain, oh, they hated that idea. They shut it down fast, which, of course, just made the colonists even angrier. So when the Revolutionary War finally kicks off, there's no time to wait for Spanish silver. The Continental Congress makes a huge all-or-nothing bet. They start printing their own paper money, called the Continental. Americans traded in their real silver for these pieces of paper, basically betting everything they had that George Washington's army would actually win. It was an unbelievable risk. And for a while there, when the war was going badly, that currency became almost worthless. But against all odds, they won the war. Awesome, right? Well, not so fast, because victory brought a whole new, even bigger headache. How do you create a stable currency for a brand new nation? Seriously, the early 1800s were the absolute Wild West for American money. To encourage freedom, the government let private banks print their own banknotes. The result was pure, unadulterated chaos. We're talking thousands of different bills floating around, and a ton of them were super easy to counterfeit. I mean, can you imagine going to the store and not knowing if the money in your wallet is even real, or if the shopkeeper will even take it? It was a complete mess. So what does it take to finally wrangle this chaos? Well, another massive national crisis, of course, the Civil War. The government was desperate for a stable way to fund the war. So in 1863, they passed a law that put a huge tax on all those private banknotes, basically taxing them right out of existence. And for the very first time, the federal government took full control and started printing one single unified currency for the entire nation. Okay, so now America has one currency. The next big question is, what do you put on it? Or maybe more importantly, who do you put on it? The founding fathers, guys like Washington and Jefferson, they had a really strong opinion about this. They wanted nothing to do with anything that smelled like a monarchy. So they made it very clear, no portraits of living people on U.S. money. Ever. They wanted symbols of liberty, things like an eagle or Lady Liberty. But, and you have to love the irony here, the very first federally issued $1 bill completely broke that rule. So whose portrait was on it? George Washington? Nope. It was the Treasury Secretary who was in charge of creating it, a guy named Salmon P. Chase. He literally put his own face on the money. Of course, Chase didn't stay on there for long. He was pretty quickly replaced by George Washington on the $1 bill. But the faces have kept changing over the years. And here's a fun fact. Some of them had even swapped places. Originally, Alexander Hamilton was on the 20 and Andrew Jackson was on the 10. Then, in 1928, they did a little switcheroo, landing on the bills we're familiar with today. For a long time, the dollar was all about economics and politics. But that changed in 1956, right in the thick of the Cold War. President Eisenhower signed a law requiring "In God We Trust" to be put on all U.S. currency. It was a very clear political statement, meant to draw a sharp line between the United States and the officially atheist Soviet Union. The dollar had become a tool of global messaging. And that brings us to the final, and maybe most important piece of the puzzle. How did this American currency become the undisputed king of the entire planet's financial system? Think about it like this. Before World War II, the British pound was the top dog, but the war completely wrecked Europe's economies, while America's economy boomed. The result? The US dollar basically took over as the world's go-to reserve currency. That's the money that central banks all over the world hold to do business. And to this day, the vast, vast majority of those reserves are held in US dollars. For a long, long time, the dollar had a kind of superpower. It was backed by gold. You could, in theory, trade your dollars in for a fixed amount of actual gold. But then, in 1971, President Nixon just cut the cord. It was known as the Nixon shock, and a lot of experts predicted total collapse. But the collapse never came. By that point, the whole world was already running on dollars. Its value wasn't tied to a yellow metal anymore. It was tied to the belief in the U.S. economy itself. So just how much does the world run on dollars? Get this. It's estimated that roughly half of all physical U.S. dollars in existence aren't even inside the United States. They're held overseas. No other currency on Earth comes even close to that. So this all leads us to the biggest, most fundamental question of all. If it's not gold, what's actually backing the dollar that's in your pocket right now? What gives it value? The answer is, well, it's kind of crazy when you really think about it. The answer is faith. The dollar is backed by a shared global belief, a collective trust that the U.S. government will pay its debts and that its economy will stay strong. In the end, the most powerful currency in the world is built on nothing more and nothing less than a promise.